Hi, everybody. Sorry for the late start. We had a few technical difficulties. My camera didn't want to work. But hey, we're here.
Hmm?
and
Hello, everyone.
yeah, with Eternal GM, the loyal one.
Come on, Matt Souza. You can
uh,
show up too.
hmm, Sorry, what?
I was saying the kitty can show up too.
Yeah. I mean, it's the internet. Shove as many cats in front of the camera as possible.
Everybody like cats. No. Oh,
All right. So today's topic is weapon identity. How to make weapons feel unique without hopefully over designing them. It's always a difficult balance. How about we start with a bad example, how not to do it? And of course,
yeah.
it's our least favorite system, the Dragon game, where,
Well, yeah. That has definitely got to be one of the worst. There are people who have copied it, but it's kind of hard to do less than they did.
yeah, it's the weapons feel almost all identical. Let's be honest. It's
Yeah.
mostly just the difference between one-handed, two-handed, or range. And even so, one-handed and two-handed don't even feel that good. And but you have the distinction between slashing, bludgeoning, and the piercing damage, right? It just doesn't come up in 99.9% of the cases. In it's
It's true.
they later on they did a little bit by adding a few features that only feats that only can be triggered by specific damage types. But even then, you have to take it, and otherwise, it's they are pretty much all identical or just a worse version.
Yeah, I had someone, I believe, on either Twitter or TikTok respond to uh, my D&D failed weapons video, and they were like, "Well, there's class features and subclass stuff as well as just feats." And I'm like, "Well, no offense, but that's kind of pathetic design that they weren't designed with that identity to begin with. If I have to sacrifice options from the rest of my character just to make a weapon seem like it's that weapon, they failed."
Yeah. But you also have to be careful to not go overboard into the opposite direction, right? It's always a balancing act with, of course, you can make all weapons super unique, but then you run into the risk of them not being balanced at all and of just overcomplicated design. And this weapon has this special perk, and this weapon has this special perk, and it gets hard to just
Mm-hmm.
remember. Okay, what does this very specific type of sword do again? Mm.
It's true. We definitely step more towards that in the D20 core system, but like most of our rules that add layers to the game, it's kind of designed for you to take it stage of rules by stage. So you start with untrained until you get to trained level rules. You wouldn't deal with a majority of the extra layers that make weapons unique. But even from the beginning, if a weapon can pierce, it can slash, and it can bash you, it has damage rates for all, even though one would be its primary. That alone adds so much to the weapons.
Mm.
The
Yeah,
one damage guy, one damage type is just, why can't I just hit them with the pommel with my bastard sword?
I don't know if you know that medieval manuscript that suggests screwing off the pommel and throwing it at the enemy,
Yeah, I've
which
seen some stuff like that.
which kind of became a meme. And they were like, "How is this a good idea?" First of all, screwing that thing off takes like 10 seconds at least. Until then, you're already dead. And then you throw it, low range, low accuracy, low damaging projectile. And then you have a
I
worse
guess it's
sword. That's
I guess if like the whole front row of your army did it, it could be kind of effective. But I mean,
I think in the sense that you just confuse the enemy and they're like, what?
yeah, it's like, um, yeah, like I get it. You just knocked a couple of us out, but like, you just threw a bunch of pommels everywhere. Yeah, I'd be confused. I know that. Like I'd heard of that, but I'd completely forgotten that that actually was a thing people did.
The question is, did the people really do it? I mean, just because it's depicted in some manuscript doesn't mean that the people actually did it, right? Uh,
That's true.
we're seeing plenty of medieval shitposting in medieval art, after all.
This is true. It's very true.
um, yeah, but that's always with history, right? Reconstructing it exactly is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, back to the weapons. How about we go through our systems? I think your systems has more complexity, so I suggest we start with my system, and then
Agreed.
afterwards you have the whole talk for yourself. So, how did I approach the problem in Ishanekon World Shapers? First of all, I did want every weapon to feel unique, but without risking it becoming overcomplicated. So I landed in a bit of a simpler solution with optional complexity that you can stack on top of that. So what did I do? I have like, good question. I think 60 weapons roughly. It's a lot of weapons, definitely. But the main difference is that every weapon has a primary and secondary stat. It's not that all weapons use strength. I mean, all melee weapons use strength and all range weapons use dexterity. But each weapon has two stats. And the primary stat is added to your damage and your hit roll, and the secondary stat is just added to the hit roll. So here you already have a lot of possible combinations. The sword feels more elegant as it has a primary stat of dexterity, but you still need strength to get everything out of it, so secondary stat strength. This feature was inspired by Dark Souls, which often has weapons that require more than one stat to wield effectively. But so now you also have a lot of options. Yes, dexterity and strength are by far the most common, but there are also stuff like intelligence. A dagger, for example, has a secondary stat of intelligence. You have a fist weapon, which is primary stat strength and instincts. You have a lot of combinations, so you can usually find something that your character can wield effectively, as long as they have the proficiency for it. And I have whole weapon categories that focus on one set. Tech weapons, for example, focus on intelligence, and mind weapons on charisma, and unearthly weapons on instinct. So you have the categories. These three categories do not deal physical damage, so that's also something I took to differentiate between the weapons. Tech weapons do elemental damage, mind weapons do psychic damage, and unearthly weapons do mystic damage. So stuff like holy damage, spirit damage, curse damage. While the other three categories, simple, medieval, and military, do deal normal physical damage. I simplified the damage type to physical, just because I didn't see the point of splitting it up into three damage types. If I didn't really plan to do anything with that. And there is of course one-handed weapons and two-handed weapons. One way I try to differentiate them a bit is that two-handed melee weapons have a reach of two squares instead of one. So a two-handed weapon does feels different than a one-handed weapon, definitely. and so on. And there are a few things like heavy weapons that are usually stronger but heavier, flexible weapons that can be used as ranged or melee. Then the reload property that many of the stronger ranged weapons have that force you to take 3 action points to attack instead of 2, which you have to compensate somehow. So it's a bit of a tax so that you can have stronger ranged weapons without being unbalanced. But yeah, at the end, most of these weapons all just you roll for attack and you hit. So it's not that massive of a difference between each other. And if you understand how an axe works, you usually understand how a sword works. But what if you want to really lean into that weapon identity? For that, I added greater talents, one for each weapon type. Sometimes two types of weapons are grouped together, like one-handed sword and two-handed swords share the same one, sword master, that allows you to make an attack if you miss with an attack. So in the sense of you parry your weapon and then you move quickly to the side to stab. And these greater talents, I built them if you really want to lean into a specific weapon identity. There are a lot of them, probably like 50 or something. I should have checked how many weapons I have and how many greater weapon greater talents I have beforehand. But that does allow you to a lot of options with stuff that really leans into that identity. You have also more exotic things like charged weapons that you can actually start to charge in the turn beforehand for massive damage, or mind weapons that target psychic weak points. For example, I think for the psychic rifle, you get a great talent that you get advantage on attacks if you attack somebody with a mental status effect. Or unearthly weapons that can help you regenerate, and so on. There are really a lot of options. But yeah, that's my main strategy that I applied to have the balance between they're not too complicated and do not differentiate from each other too much, but you still can have that full weapon identity if you really want to. Eternal, how about you to tell us a bit about your system?
Well, like for good examples of not needing to learn the extra rules like the training level system, just starting with the untrained rules, two good examples would be, well, three would be the whip, a trident or bident like weapon, and then a flail. So flails in our system actually will completely negate the bonus that your shield will give you because of the chain. It will go right around the shield. So it's as if your shield is not there. For our whips, you actually have to have specific distance. So if your target is at a certain distance too far, it's just not going to hit them. Right below that is where the whipping moment happens. And below that is where you can actually grapple it, like we've seen Indiana Jones do and other characters with whips. With the trident, in our system, you actually will, as you're leveling up as a marshal, you'll get more attacks that you're able to do by it decreasing the amount of time it takes for you to do an attack. So when you get to the point where a basic attack is going to be 1 second, it now becomes available with a trident or bident for you to stab it into them, use your extra attack for you to twist it as you're pulling it out, which will actually change the damage type from piercing to rending, which is more for like uneven wounds and for animal bite like things. So it's instantly going to have you do a little bleeding. So we added the identity of that, plus, like I'd mentioned, the 3 different damage types. We did do things where it's not everything is slicing. We actually have chopping for something like an axe. We have smashing for a hammer. And specifically unarmed nunchucks and things like that handles it with impact damage. So we've not only added different damage types to help diversify that with those extra little weapon features or abilities, Each damage type, if it crits, has a specific extra status effect or other
Hmm.
thing that goes with it.
That's cool.
So our game masters are really busy having to learn a lot of that in our system. But for the players, and you only need to go as far as you want into it. But our training system blows that out the water because your regular little dagger of European design will be able to be used as a lockpick and a small crowbar, where a larger, more like arming sword or bastard sword is now able to substitute being a wood chopping axe as well as a larger crowbar. This is because of the first feature at trained level, tools as well. If you expand into that, this is how you'll get into half swording with our system, being able to grapple with the sword, and eventually having a better damage transfer against plate mail and other metal type armors.
Hmm.
So we did go as far as we thought we needed to without overcomplicating it. But since we've separated it into rules, it's only going to be as much as you're willing to deal with. So that's kind of the route we took with them.
Yeah, when you mentioned status effects on a crit, I find it interesting how you did that with every single damage type. I have a few greater talents, I think only two to be honest, for a few weapons that have that. Staffs, for example, on a crit can stun somebody, and flails in my systems when you take the greater talents can make somebody bleed, and that type of bleeding is more potent than normal bleeding. Mm. I guess there are nunchucks and three segment staffs, which grant you an additional attack for half damage when you crit, but that's not really a status effect. I mean, there are some specific crit weapons, but yeah, dagger of course, but that just deals more damage when you crit.
Feel free to take a look at all the damage types in the document. I mean, like I said,
Mm.
it is kind of an ugly, unordered version since we're mid renovations effectively. But no, I really tried to make each of the damage types have something unique. Like, you got magic damage and psychic damage. Well, these actually are affecting something besides your health. So they actually have a completely different identity than regular types of damage. As well as that certain things will do just concussive damage, which the best example is picture a guy in plate mail fighting a bunch of guys with a bunch of sticks. And eventually they just pummel him so much he's dazed and like out of stamina on the ground and can't move. Well, that's concussive damage. So we decided to kind of add that in to be able to add that element. That was part of our weapon identity, was by adding certain damage types, we were able to tweak the results of certain combative situations. Like you might have a katana, but it's not going to have that same concussive damage transfer as a European sword because they're designed to go after plate mail. But a katana against no armor is actually going to do consistently better damage because they're literally designed to just be able to cut really smoothly. You got the fall test you can do with a katana. It's hard as heck to swing a bastard sword and have it edge on. That's why, katanas are almost designed to help you do the job, where a bastard sword is just, it's not, rough isn't the right word. It's designed for such a specific group of purposes that you actually have to train a lot more to be able to get its exact edge on. Where a katana, if you swing it and have the grip right on the sword, you're going to put the edge on them. So we wanted to kind of express that a little into it with the damage rates. They may have the same amount of point effectively for damage, but one is a singular die and the other is two die, giving the katana much easier consistency with that. But if you're fighting armor, you're still going to do consistently less than the equivalent sized European sword.
Yeah, your system really incentivizes fighters to be packing different weapons for different situations,
Mm-hmm.
which is more realistic, definitely, and makes what weapon you choose an interesting tactical choice. And
Hmm.
I specifically wanted to avoid that because one thing that I did not like about the Dragon game is that if you want to play the typical dual wielding dagger rogue, well, tough luck, short swords are better. You're nerfing yourself. So I wanted to
In our
make
game,
every weapon be reliable so that if you just want that single weapon and nothing else, you can do that. Again, different design goals. Um,
I think you'll appreciate what we did with our like small daggers and knives though. We made them D2s. So why? You're like, well, first off, if you hit the 2 in our system, it's now 4 damage. Our crits double the number for the damage roll. Where a crit for your to hit damages the and doubles the amount of dice and adds a point of durability damage. So with the daggers, if I'm critting and I have poison on my blade, whenever I crit, that's when the poison transfers. So if you want to play the double dagger rogue, no, it is so not more efficient for a poison using assassin to use a short sword. It is completely more ideal to go using daggers, even if it's just one. You got a higher crit rate, therefore a higher poisoning rate. They can
so
also
do I
hide.
get it correctly that it basically has a 50% chance to hit, and when it hits, it's a crit, right?
No, 1 point, it still hits. On the 2, it does 4 damage and now crits. Because really, you either glancing cut somebody with a knife or you like point on and you pierce them. There's not a lot of options with a knife. It's either going to go in or it's not. And yeah, you can miss, but we're talking about if you have hit, what's the extent of how well it lands? But yeah, it's actually prone to be a little more common for you to do higher damage with D2s. We don't actually use above a D6 for damage. We use multiple dice and potentially lower base damage applied to them to help balance the multiple dice compared to the single.
So we talked about. Is your cat all right?
Yeah, he's just coming in and out. Look, look. This is what's going on, buddy.
Aw. It's just like, meow, meow, meow. Now he's
Yeah.
quiet. So I want to be famous. Put me in front of the camera. Meow.
He's got those Halloween eyes. He's literally the cat from this image.
But what I wanted to say just about now. Okay, we talked about how to make individual weapons feel different. But how about we focus on how to make a one-handed weapon versus a two-handed weapon feel different? And what about dual wielding, right?
Mhm.
Mm. In the Dragon game, for example, alright, okay, dual wielding feels different because it gives you that extra attack, but you're basically dealing the same amount of damage, but you have to sacrifice your bonus action as a two-handed weapon. So it's not really that good. and so on. So do you want to start how you try to make
Yeah.
that make feel different? Also, one hand
So,
sword and shield, right? That combination.
oh yeah, no, like always being able to have this shield option is cool, but with our casting system, if you're getting into magic, there are spells that actually some will say are requiring 2 hands and one that are one hand. So there's a whole style
Mm.
you can build around that. But really, we wanted the weapons to not feel like it's a sacrifice of some set of action, like you're losing your bonus action. We didn't want that. Designing it completely around your time. Actually, if you train on both weapons, you are actually training them to be equal. So as long as you have the time to do that attack, it's not actually any more of a restriction than just attacking twice and things like that. So with these, our system kind of focused less on making it feel different besides your utility of not having both hands having something. But with versatile weapons where you can have one or two hand, we do the extra half and the modifier added in so that you are applying more damage when you hit.
Kind of like Dark Souls when you two-handed weapons and with the strength modifier, right?
Hmm.
Was that
So
your
it's
inspiration, or did you?
no. The dragon game inspired me to do better.
No, not the
I didn't actually.
Dark Souls. I was talking about Dark Souls.
Oh no, I was saying that's not the inspiration.
You
It's
mean
the dragon
the Dragon
game.
Game? Okay, now I get. Sorry, I misunderstood.
I've actually self-admittedly suck at those games, and the farthest I've played in it was my friend had this thing where he could run the game twice at the same time, so we technically could both play it on a single player. So that's as far as I've gotten. I got far enough to feel confident and for him to walk away long enough for me to die. And then it just kept happening. And it's like, it's not as, like, I got better. I've learned more stuff. It didn't matter. Like,
It's
I'm just
not for
not that great
everyone.
at it.
No game is
Mm-hmm.
for everyone, right? So it's okay if I'm a big fan of Souls games, not because I'm a hardcore gamer. It's just fun for me, I guess. And I'm not really that good. Melania still kicked my ass. I have not beaten her yet, and it was at a point where I thought like, why am I playing this? This is not fun. You know what? Screw you, Melania. I'm just walking away.
And I love watching some of the skilled players fighting those things, but realize watching them, this is why I'm not winning. Like, I'm 35. I have been playing video games that go the opposite direction of that style of combat for so long. It just doesn't work. I would have to reset it. And it's like, yeah, it's influenced me with some of the types of weapons. Like if you were a Ganthor or a larger species in our system, then you're actually using a large two-handed weapon like it's a regular two-handed. So you're actually using I forget the name of the category, but it's a specific category like gargantuan or something weapons that are now for larger species. So we could take any of these and actually have the idea of what would be a Titanic sized shield and how does that work if this giant throws it at us? By having that ability to do that, like, yeah, we have a half giant kind of character that can use two-handed weapons with the right strength as one-handed weapons. So the only thing that's going to be held back is the larger weapons will have a similar effect to our armor, and it will kind of restrict some of your checks, mainly like a dex or reaction check mid-combat. It's going to affect you on how far you're dodging out and stuff like that.
When it's come to bigger creatures, the only real difference in my system is that the weapon for that size category has to be twice as heavy, and you cannot. Basically, they are completely separate from each other. A medium-sized creature cannot wield a big-sized weapon. Of course, you can say, all right, you take the big one-handed weapon and use it as a two-handed weapon, but that's more giving it into the hand of the GM if they really want to do that. Usually it's easier to scavenge materials from the equipment of a big enemy anyway. But there's one difference which is technically does not come from the weapon but from the size category. For each size category that you're bigger than medium, your melee range increases by 1 meter. So, which can get really ridiculous if you put a two-handed weapon on top of that, or even a ranged a melee weapon with extra range, like a pull-on weapon. Suddenly, a big creature has a range of 4 meters with their melee weapon. Big plus 5 meters, and so on. Attack that with combine that with attack of opportunity, and suddenly you have this huge area where the first person to take a step in gets a free attack from the giant weapon. So if you really want to simulate a giant creature to be really powerful and strong, then you usually just pump up the level so that they can hit harder. But the reason why I did not just want to make bigger creatures stronger was because depending on your setting, being bigger doesn't mean that you're stronger. There are many anime settings, for examples, where You have the normal protagonist, normal size, and they just wipe the floor with the huge monsters, right? So I want you to have the option as a medium creature to hit just as hard as a Godzilla sized one, if your system allows it. And if you're really fighting Godzilla as a normal human, well, then you're just a level 1 mere mortal character, or even just only human character. And Godzilla will be level 15 grade 5 boss or something.
Dude, I'm so true. I can't wait for that new movie. Just so you mentioned Godzilla, we have Ice Godzilla coming too. That's gonna be cool. That just makes it worse though. Like, not only is it giant and can wield big weapons, it has ice breath.
Nice. I do
No,
need a
but
few more kaiju creatures for my creature list. Currently, the only thing that would fit into this category of a kaiju would be the Kraken. Maybe the
mm,
Elder Fire Dragon, but he's still smaller than the Kraken.
you
Mm.
could always fix that. No.
Yeah, now that I finally pushed out patch 2.0 for my system and overcame all those technical difficulties, where I don't want to go into detail, but which postponed the whole release for 2 months because of that. Now I can focus on maybe creating some more new creatures, right?
Yeah.
But let's return to the topic. We were still
Yeah.
talking about how to make one-handed weapon versus two-handed weapon versus dual wielding versus sword and shield. How to make it feel different.
I feel like our world and the way we're holding that to people is going to add something to that concept. Like, if you are wielding a Zweihander, you are not swinging this in a hallway. Okay? This is why katana wakizashi. This is why arming sword, short sword. This, we want you to realize, yeah, you're like, let's say you do have a two-handed sword training. If if you're at least focusing on swords, you're able to really kind of double up on your training. So it's not really going to be as much of a hindrance to have multiple similar category weapons. So it's kind of like you're just using different sized ones to fit your thing. But yeah, we wanted you to actually have to think about different situations you were going to be in. If all you're carrying is a big two-handed sword, you are going to come across situations where it is not functionable. And that's just because you can't actually swing it in the area you're in. It's like too thin of an area. So this is why I say that, yeah, it's going to feel different. There's areas you can't even use them. And that was more of the world itself, not as much a mechanical difference. So I thought that was worth bringing up.
Hmm. Yeah, again, you're really leaning into the realism of having at least 3 weapons with you for different situations. Mm. In my system, usually having a melee weapon and a ranged weapon, if you're a weapon user, is more than enough. Depending on your build, you might not even need the melee or the ranged weapon. But how I made them differentiate with each other. First, you have the default two-handed weapons deal more damage, of course, and you have the extra range when you have with melee weapons. While if you have a shield, you get extra evasion. That's a nice boost, but it really comes into play. There are 4 lesser talents, which are kind of like the baseline weapon lesser talents that give that you kind of should take if you really want to specialize in that type of weapon. You have two-handed attacker, which allows you to re-roll the damage dice, making two-handed weapons the most reliable damage variant, because they usually have huge dice, and it feels awful if you roll a 1, right? Two-handed weapon attacker makes that really rare that you roll a 1, since you have basically advantage on that roll, giving you really the feeling this is a big, reliable weapon. For one-handed weapons, you have one-handed precision, which gives you +2 to attack rolls, um, which makes it good for precise fighting. It does not have the firepower of a two-handed weapon, but with precision, you can do a lot of stuff. Plus, you've got a free hand, which you can use to lean into, for example, a grapple build, but you don't have to. One-handed precision is good enough to completely lean on that. Or you can have a one-handed melee weapon in one hand and a one-handed range weapon in the other, and then you don't have to switch up weapons. Just it's the enemy in melee range, normal melee one-handed attack is range, take out the pistol with the one hand and start shooting. So basically the one-handed fighter is the technique fighter in a sense, right? It gives you more tactical options, your attacks are more reliable, but you lack the firepower of other options. For the shield and sword combo, you have reactive shields, giving you 1 extra reaction point as long as you're wielding a shield, which is nice to combo with defensive reaction abilities like parry, resist, defy, and so on, really strengthening your defensive options. But you can also use it offensively, right there, like attack of opportunity and so on. Mm-hmm. And then finally, 2 one-handed weapons. The thing is, if you're wielding just 2 one-handed weapons in each arm on its own, it doesn't do anything, since in real life it is by far the one that requires the most training to use effectively. Otherwise, you're kind of getting in the way, and you're not really swinging them faster than if you just were hammering away with one weapon. So you need the lesser talents, multi-wielder, which allows you for each additional weapon you have to make 1 extra attack for half the damage, but you get -1 to all attack rolls for each such weapons. Note that it doesn't limit yourself to 2 weapons. If you're a creature with 4 arms and 4 weapons, now you can make 4 attacks, but you get -4 to all attack rolls. So I really wanted to give you the options to be that, like General Grievous or
just picturing Goro with 4 lightsabers now.
You have so many weapons you can't hit quickly, but you kind of get in the way of yourself, right? So it's hard to land them. And so that's the approach that I took. But you still have some incentive to mix and match. For example, if your main weapon is a two-handed weapon, usually switching from one weapon to the other costs 1 action point. But what if you cannot have not that action point, or you need it for something else? Then what if your ranged backup weapon is one-handed? You cannot attack with a two-handed weapon with one hand, but you can hold it, and then you have a free hand, and you can draw a weapon for free. So now you have the combo, I have the two-handed swords, but if I'm forced into range, I pick my one-handed pistol or hand crossbow or whatever, and shoot with that. It's not as damaging if you said, okay, I've got a longbow in reserve, but just in case, but you don't have to pay that action point cost to switch to weapons. But you can also circumvent that if you take a ranged weapon that can be effectively used in melee, like a shotgun, or if you take a close combat shooter, or I forgot the name of the lesser talent. Basically, that allows you to attack with a ranged weapon in melee range, or if you're melee, if you're a melee fighter, maybe you're just so fast that you can pretty much close almost any distance. For example, if you're playing a rusher, or then There are some ability, or maybe you have a backup ability, like a physical bolt, for example, and that's your emergency range option instead of a ranged weapon. So you're not forced, like optimal play doesn't force you into having a ranged and melee option. Because I really did want that. If you really just want the one weapon, you are supposed to be able to just have the one weapon and not be disadvantaged. That was very important for me in my design process. Every weapon is viable and has similar strength level, just different advantages and disadvantages.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I talked for a while. Want to add
Yeah,
anything?
I definitely feel I took more of the, as you say, like the realistic but also Dark Souls approach of like, look, it's a you better get good and remember the idea of your sword doesn't work in these small hallways or caverns and in this underground tunnel. You know, the if you're a spear user, same thing, but that's specifically why like we have a town spear and a war spear, and we actually European named spears a lot of times were named almost by what position they were used. Like a guard spear was a different length than a town spear, and a town spear was that length because it could be entirely used within the alleyways between buildings. So I wanted to bring that element into it as a part of getting better at the system by having to think about the difference of utility of different weapons. You're actually having to plan out your set of gear. We wanted to do that for marshals to have not only the versatility of different weapons, but actually each weapon has a lot of cool features it can do. Like I refer back to the lock picking thing. Like I think we're the only system out there that actually has the concept of being able to use certain weapons to replace certain tools. You can. So I mean, I might be wrong on that, but all the time I've researched, that's something I've never seen in a different system. Like our rogues will be able to carry a dagger around of European design, and because of that really fine tip point, they'll be able to lockpick with it.
No.
I think
It
that's
is.
utterly.
No. Again, the realism. You're really focusing on that, right? Um, I guess my system has a built-in equipment upgrade, so you can build tools into your weapon, but it's not really a feature. Of course, you can always improvise, and I and there's also always cinematic action.
Yes.
So, roleplay wise, a good GM should allow you to use a dagger as a lockpick anyway.
Uh-huh.
But it doesn't hurt to write it down in the rules so that a bad GM cannot prevent you from doing so.
Yeah, I didn't like the idea of how the Dragon game said all of our cool stuff is like GM discretion. It's like, that's not fair. Like, yeah, I was the cool GM. I let a freaking Warforged with Paladin, like tech abilities be in Barovia. That was crazy to learn to deal with. It was fun. I enjoyed it. It was a challenge. I didn't actually know how to deal with everything that a paladin and his homebrewed tech paladin and a warforged were going to deal in a setting neither should exist in. But it worked.
Now that you're talking about Barovia and the Warforged, I have to think of
Yes.
the Dragon Ball Z scene with Android 16 versus Cell. And Cell's got him with his draining spike, and I've got you. Now I'm gonna eat you and drain you, and then nothing. So, what's going on? So yeah. Sorry, I'm completely artificial. No biomaster or sword here. Bam.
Strahd walks in and goes, sleep. And half the party falls asleep. Two don't. He goes, command, convincing them that it's a good idea to take a nap. So the people like elves that don't have to sleep and aren't affected by that went to sleep. The dude's just standing there. Strahd basically does that, has undead rise up and grab him and goes, I will figure out how to defeat you, Metal Man. And
Uh,
like from that moment on, I'm playing this kind of bullcrap game where I'm restricting myself to everything I know because I have to figure it out as a guy who doesn't even understand a Warforged. So like, yeah, no, it was really cool. It's great to have a system that can challenge you. Like in my system, we're running Barovia right now, and it was the coolest thing ever. But in the middle of it, I didn't know what to do about them firebombing the Yester Hill Druids. And you're like, well, how would they do that? Well, they made friends with the Crow people who have a bunch of oil and alcohol. So what happens? They get them flying above and dropping freaking air raids. And I'm like, well, this isn't going to be a challenge anymore. But they didn't feel like it was wasted. They felt like the extra effort and planning they went through, even though it destroyed the opposition, and they just had to come in and mop up. They felt like it was earned by having a system that allowed them to create literally military tactics and apply them. Felt really cool. It was kind of disappointing to see 7 druids fall like that, but
my first instinct would have been the druids turned into giant eagles or something, but uh, yeah, I don't know.
they
But you gotta
were in this.
reward creativity, right? If
Yeah.
your players
Plus, I didn't want to.
come up with a great plan and you did not think about it at all, let them steal roll the encounters, long as they're not cheesing every single encounter. Like give them the one encounter where they just cheese it with their brilliant tactics.
Okay, the next combat they came across was werewolves, and right now they had an ally of the werewolf, and one of them turned, so they got to see even with werewolves on their side, every party member almost dropped. The damage rates are just totally different than a dude with a stick that can cast spells. It's like no offense to the druids there, but they were just Strahd's like toys. So yeah, the moment I brought rending damage into it and they started bleeding from every attack, it got bad. Like they hit a point in the game where it's like, all right, I know we got to handle the werewolf cave, but we do not have the right equipment, and they just almost ripped our guts out. I'm like, yep. I said it's Barovia. I didn't say everything was going to be easy. No.
It reminds me of the game I had yesterday where I had to find an ancient Oni. And that was just a massive creature with a huge club. And, remembering the whole talk about giant creatures hitting hard. Well, they only had the talents to hit really hard. And because they are all very experienced, I tend to make those encounters a bit more difficult for them. And that was one of the 5 big bosses of the whole adventure. So the Oni starts off with just being invisible, so his first attack has advantage. He uses a cleave, and all of their vitality drops below half afterwards. They are like, what?
See, you should have had the Smash Brothers Melee home run bat sound, just waiting for a crit.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a creature specifically designed to hit really hard with a high encounter difficulty. So yeah, especially in my system, everybody can usually hit really hard. One bad crit can down you if you don't pack any defensive capabilities with you, right? So, plus they kind of just stumbled in totally unprepared, even though they knew that this was probably the strongest enemy on the entire island. It's like, hey, it's not my fault if you do not apply temporary vitality beforehand, especially since you have a guy in your group that's pretty good at doing that. And if you didn't summon your creatures beforehand and just try to sneak in while having a Tauren warrior in full plate with you, of course he noticed you immediately.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I like the Celestial Mancer mage in our system is they have access to sonomancy, which is sound manipulation.
Ooh.
That's where silent spells, being able to throw your voice, change your voice, all sorts of just random things, as well as like ear shattering sound potential. But the idea of, hey, can you make all of us silent? Yeah. And then you have a bunch of people in plate mail hauling like ass, and it's like making no sounds at all. Yeah, that's cool. But also, that's kind of scary to think about. A bunch of guys in plate mail running is silent. So, yeah, you've got to do your preparatory stuff like that. That's another thing that goes into sometimes you really don't need a bow. Sometimes your team really does need one. So having multiple weapons, like 2, maybe 3 per character, is going to really diversify the capabilities of the team. We didn't want to empower any one individual to the point where you don't need your help and your friends. We wanted a big element of this game being you learning to synergize with your teammates and also building a team that from the get-go is meant to work well together. That's going to be one of the main points. Like, you cannot solve everything. There's always going to be stuff you can't. Even if you have a 6-7 person team, there's going to be some things y'all just don't have the specific to necessarily deal, but y'all have a way to handle the problem. It's just not the, oh, well, let's dispel this because, let's not try and go way around to get around it. Or, hey, we now have field equipment. We can actually go up and above this trap. There's always different options, but it's to make you think, to come up with unique solutions. And a lot of that was inside the weapons, with certain creatures being able to resist, like, just overall certain types of damage. Like, you might actually have to get a hammer to crush this thing doing and smashing damage because it's just too hard of a shell for you to do everything else, which will all be resisted. It's not like it's going all but piercing or bashing. No. You need an actual weapon that's physically going to crush something if it's got a harder shell. So even in situations like that, if you're like, well, we don't have a hammer wielder, maybe you have a mage. Maybe you have a mystic, something that can do something to it. You're always going to be able to have a solution.
In my systems, you can also run into the problem, especially with a less experienced group. You throw an enemy against them, and the players have nothing to deal with that enemy. I had probably the strongest example was when I threw a golem at them, and he had just an insane amount of armor. And well, most of them were not hard hitting fighters, right? So their attacks just kind of bounced off without dealing any damage, other than the cursed troll that was still hitting with a blunt weapon. But I have the backup option of a cinematic action. Cinematic action can always get you out of a sticky situation, even if you do not have anything with you that can deal with a specific type of enemy.
Right.
Okay, we are running closer to the end. Is there anything you want to say about weapons?
I think we are the only system I've come across that's really considered the idea of you being able to take any weapon design we have and using our 5 material tiers and 5 quality tiers, be able to actually improve the durability, base damage, and other elements to the weapons. That's mainly a video game thing, but being a huge video game nerd of RPGs, there was no way I wasn't adding improved materials and quality into weapons, and we have a fully functioning 1-page long crafting system that tells you how to deal with all of that, including what tools, kits, and stations, if necessary, are required.
Yeah, that's one topic we completely forgot. Upgrades to make your weapons feel unique. At least you already mentioned yours. My system has an upgrade option. That way you can give your weapon an identity, and you can increase its damage, you can increase its hit chance, you can increase the die size for damage, or it can be something more exotic. You can turn it into an elemental weapon that deals fire damage, or
Mhm.
you can give your weapon an automatic chance to cause bleeding on the target, or stunning them, or all the status effects. Increase crit chance, increase crit damage. There are a lot of options.
Yeah, we also went the Diablo 2 kind of route of the socketable items into
Mm.
weapons. So beyond that, we have combat gadgets from the Gadgeteer. One of its subclasses specifically designs combat gadgets. Well, they plug into the sockets on your armor, weapons, and shield. And instead of it being like +2 to this, or you have fire resistance of this level, it's actually a utilizable action that you can make that gadget function in combat. So we went kind of nuts with creativity. Um, I just, to me, I've always loved the idea of you being able to do stuff with your weapon to where you could show it and it's unique because it's not just we can put different things in there. You actually get to design your weapon in a way that other things besides a video game, like Guild Wars and Diablo 2, kind of had anything short of that. And they didn't even have improved materials. We combined both elements.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so, yeah, we did kind of go nuts with that.
What I like also about my system is I implemented negative upgrades, so downgrades. Uh, Usually only can upgrade a weapon to a specific tier, depending on your level and your own crafting skills. But if you add negative upgrades, you can add more positives. For example, you can make the weapon deal more damage, but increase its precision. Or maybe go the other round, just a really heavy weapon, unwieldy, but that smashes in. And there are also some more creative ones. One I like is the turret downgrade. It's one of the strongest downgrades, where you first have to place the weapon on the ground before you can use it. But that's -3 upgrade. That's you can make the weapon deal +3 more damage in exchange for that. Also, stuff like sentient weapons or holy weapons, so that if you have this weapon in your inventory and you're doing something evil, well, now you have to make a will defense roll. And if you fail, well, now the item is preventing you from doing so. uh,
Fair enough.
there are also a lighter negative version of that, where if you don't follow the rules of the weapon, it just refuses you from using it, instead of just forcing you to not do it. But yeah, a lot of options. I just have it open here on the side, scrolling through it. Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to
Another
mention something I wanted also to talk about: area of effect weapons. I don't know if your system has that.
We will be adding them in. They are fitting under the complicated grouping because they're like chained weapons. The 3-section staff, three tri chucks, and things like that. They're meant to have a more wider effect.
Oh.
But since you've got a lot of them already planned out, this should be your section because I have nothing formalized yet for it.
Yeah, my system has 3 types of area of effect weapons. First of all, the type of weapon that affects everything around you, um, usually reserved to like symbols that you like hold up and radiates all around you. Then is the line version, which is more like a flamethrower, where you have control, but it's still in melee range. A few squares that you can hit with that. And then there is the range, just square options, stuff like rocket launchers, grenade launchers, and so on. Area of effect weapons in my system deal significantly less damage to balance it out, and all of them have the reload property, so they're a bit clunky to use. But you can specialize into them, reduce the negative sides. One big negative side effect of area of effect weapons is that you cannot use maneuver attacks on them. stuff like precise attack or a heat strike and so on. But there is the Grenadier sub archetype, where his very first feature allows you to do just that. And suddenly, the maneuver ability that's just supposed to hit once now hits like 3 targets. Um, yeah, that's. Uh, yeah, area of effect weapons are really something you usually only have them if you specialize into them because they are clunky. It's if
Yep.
you want to deal with multiple enemies and you're not specializing into them, it's usually a better idea to take an ability like cleave, whirlwind attack, or projectile barrage for ranged weapons. Uh, but it's still an option, and quite frankly, having a backup um, area of effect weapon for dealing with multiple enemies is still not a bad idea. I mean, unlike cleave and so on, it doesn't cost you any willpower to take out the grenade launcher and be like,
This is true.
uh, each of them also, of course, having their own greater talents, right? The grenade launcher, for example, has modified grenades, which allows you to use explosive abilities through the grenade launcher, upcasting them and dealing with them as if it were weapon attack.
That's
But
pretty cool.
yeah, uh, but yeah, I think we could talk for hours about single little details, but I don't think it really makes sense to like dive into every single weapon we designed and what makes them special and what kind of greater talent I designed or what kind of damage types does in your system and so on.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, the only other unique thing category wise, not a specific weapon, would be mentioning cultural variants. So, like, your Orcish is going to be a little more bulky, but it's going to do more damage. So, it's going to be heavier in weight, higher stat cost. Your Elven will be lighter. Your Gnomish will have more of the sockets. So, you have a variety of differences that are kind of like an overlay of a feature or something now being added to the weapons and equipment. It's not as much as a change as much as, like I said, a cultural variant. It's like as if a different cultural species made this. So, like, your Elven's always going to be like Elven armor and weapons.
Mhm. And what about feline weapons? Meow.
Oh, they're perfect. No.
uh, my systems does have claw weapons, dexterity plus instinct, right? But yeah. Okay, then I think we talked about the most important aspects. So thank you everyone who joined us, and thank you for listening. And see you next week. Any announcements you want to make, Eternal GM, about?
For anyone who is in the server at this point, or you gain access to the server through a link Blaze is posted, you can come into the GM's Day Off section, and I have my current version of the playtest document. We're starting to let certain groups of people see it before it goes open online. That's simply because we're in renovation mode for it right now, and it's not exactly pretty. But all the information's there. We do have a table of contents you can click on and get to most of it.
Yeah, I remember. For me, it took like I think 3 years for it to be even remotely pretty. But for
Yeah.
my announcements, I already mentioned that the big patch 2.0.0, 20 new sub archetypes, everybody. It has some really cool options like the Terraformer that could just change the whole battlefield, or if you're interested in money, the Financier who just gets free money. I don't know, but I love the Financier. It's so goofy, but also so useful in some campaigns.
Yeah.
And so on. And base building rules. You can now build your own base, your own home, your own kitchen, cook stuff. Incentives for going into an inn are now there because you can now recover extra temporary vitality if you go into a fancy hotel instead of the cheap one around the corner. It's really the biggest patch so far.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. So check it out for free. You can find the link to the website on my YouTube channel. Yeah. Okay, enough announcement. See you, everybody. Bye.